Hello, night listener, and welcome to Little Nightmare. I'm Emma, and tonight I'll be keeping you company to help you fall asleep. But before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and leave a comment telling me where you're listening from. Story 1. I used to stare at the ceiling to calm myself. It was flat, pale, predictable. But then the paint began to ripple. At first, I blamed heat. But heat doesn't make surfaces expand and collapse like lungs. Now, when I lie on the floor and look up, I see it flutter, delicate, almost shy. Sometimes it inhales deeply, the bulge stretching across the entire room. Other times, it holds its breath, waiting. I tried recording it. On video, nothing happens. But in the playback, I hear something exhale slowly, wet, patient, familiar. I haven't looked up in days. The first sign wasn't the breathing. It was the smell. Sweet, cloying, like flowers left too long in stagnant water. I noticed it while reading in my favorite chair, the one positioned perfectly beneath the overhead light. The scent drifted down, settling on my skin like morning dew. I checked the windows, searched for forgotten bouquets, even sniffed the air conditioning vents. Nothing. But when I tilted my head back, the smell intensified, as if it were seeping directly from above. That evening, I lay on my bed and watched the ceiling. The white paint seemed softer somehow, less rigid than before. I convinced myself it was shadows from the streetlight outside, the way branches swayed and cast moving patterns. But the movement was too rhythmic, too deliberate. It reminded me of something breathing in deep sleep. I reached up, my fingertips barely grazing the surface. The paint felt warm, almost feverish, and beneath my touch, I swear I felt the faintest vibration. Sleep became elusive. Every creak of the house, every settling sound, made me wonder if it was coming from above. I started keeping a notebook beside my bed, documenting the subtle changes. The breathing seemed strongest during the quiet hours, when the world outside grew still. I wrote down patterns, trying to find logic in the rhythm. Sometimes it was steady, like meditation breathing. Other times it would pause, as if aware of my attention. The recordings began as proof for myself. I set up my phone on the nightstand, camera aimed upward, and let it run while I slept. Each morning, I'd review the footage with growing frustration. The ceiling looked perfectly normal, static, and lifeless. But the audio told a different story. Beneath the ambient sound of the house, there was something else. A soft, wet sound, like air passing through water. It was almost musical, rising and falling with deliberate timing. I started sleeping on the floor. If the ceiling was breathing, I wanted to be closer to it. The hardwood was cold against my back, but I found strange comfort in the proximity. From this angle, the movements were more pronounced. The entire surface would lift slightly, then settle back down, creating waves that rippled outward from the center. I began to match my breathing to its rhythm, finding an odd synchronicity that made me feel less alone. My neighbor mentioned that my apartment had been empty for months before I moved in. The previous tenant had left suddenly, abandoning most of their belongings. I asked what had happened, but she just shrugged and said some people couldn't handle the isolation. I didn't press further, but her words lingered. Had someone else noticed what I was seeing? Had they felt the same pull toward the ceiling's strange rhythm? The breathing became more pronounced during storms. Rain would drum against the windows, and the ceiling would respond, its movements becoming deeper, more urgent. I realized I was anticipating these moments, even craving them. The intensified breathing made me feel connected to something larger, though I couldn't explain what. During one particularly violent storm, I placed my palm flat against the ceiling and felt it push back, warm and yielding. I tried to research the building's history, searching for any mention of unusual incidents or structural problems. The records were sparse, mostly routine maintenance reports and lease agreements. But buried in the digital archives, I found a single complaint from years ago. A tenant had reported unusual sounds coming from the ceiling, described as rhythmic disturbances that prevented sleep. The complaint was dismissed as plumbing issues, but reading those words made my skin crawl. The breathing began to change. What had started as gentle, almost soothing movements became more aggressive. The ceiling would swell suddenly, as if gasping for air, then contract violently. I could hear the paint crackling under the strain, tiny flakes drifting down like snow. The sweet smell grew stronger, now tinged with something metallic, almost like blood. I found myself spending entire nights on the floor, watching the ceiling's increasingly erratic performance. My attempts to photograph the phenomenon failed consistently. Every picture showed a normal, slightly textured ceiling. But when I looked at the images later, I noticed subtle differences. Shadows fell in impossible directions. The texture seemed to shift between frames, as if the surface was continuously reshaping itself. I began to question my perception, wondering if I was seeing things that weren't there, or if the ceiling was somehow aware of my documentation attempts. The breaking point came during a particularly quiet evening. I was lying on the floor, watching the ceiling's gentle rise and fall when it suddenly stopped. Complete stillness. The silence was more disturbing than any sound I'd ever heard. I waited, holding my own breath, but nothing happened. Then, slowly, the ceiling began to descend. Not breathing, not pulsing, but actually lowering toward me. The distance closed inch by inch, and I could hear the wooden beams groaning under some invisible weight. I scrambled to my feet, panic flooding my system. The ceiling continued its descent, and I realized I could no longer stand upright in the room. I pressed my hands against the surface, trying to push it back up, but it felt solid and immovable. The sweet smell became overwhelming, and I could taste it on my tongue. My phone lay abandoned on the floor, still recording, but I couldn't reach it without crouching. The ceiling stopped just above my head, close enough that I could feel its warmth on my scalp. I stood frozen, afraid to move, afraid to breathe. Then, impossibly, I heard something. A voice, muffled and distant, but unmistakably human. It was calling my name over and over, with increasing urgency. The sound seemed to come from within the ceiling itself, as if someone were trapped inside, trying to reach me. I pressed my ear against the surface, and the voice became clearer. It was pleading, desperate, asking for help. But there was something wrong with the tone, something that made my blood run cold. The voice was mine. I was hearing my own voice, calling out from somewhere inside the ceiling, begging to be freed. The realization hit me like a physical blow, and I staggered backward, my legs giving out. The ceiling began to rise again, slowly returning to its original position. But something had changed. The breathing resumed, but now it was labored, as if whatever lived above me was struggling. I could hear wet, gurgling sounds, like someone drowning in their own fluids. The sweet smell was replaced by something putrid, organic, alive. I knew I should leave, pack my belongings, and find somewhere else to live, but I couldn't move. I'm still here, still lying on the floor, still watching. The ceiling breathes constantly now, deep, shuddering breaths that shake the entire room. Sometimes I hear my voice calling out, but it's getting weaker, more distant. The recordings show nothing, but I know what I've seen. I know what I've heard. The ceiling isn't just breathing, it's digesting. And I think I'm almost ready to become part of it. When maintenance finally comes to check on me, they'll find this notebook and maybe understand. The ceiling looks normal to them, I'm sure. But if they listen carefully, if they pay attention to the subtle sounds and movements, they might hear it too. the breathing that never stops, the voice that calls out from within, the invitation to join whatever existence waits above us all. The ceiling is waiting. It's always been waiting. And now, finally, I understand what it wants. Story 2. I never liked eye contact with my reflection. Something about it always felt off. But lately, it's not just discomfort, it's resistance. When I fake a smile, the mouth in the mirror holds a second longer. When I shake my head, it's a beat behind. I told myself it's nothing. But the last time I whispered a lie aloud, the reflection didn't mimic my lips. It watched, blank, waiting. I backed away, heart pounding. But my reflection didn't move. It stayed close to the glass, as if listening harder than I was speaking. The bathroom mirror became my obsession. Each morning, I'd stand before it, testing small movements. A raised eyebrow, a subtle nod, a forced laugh. The delay was so slight I questioned my sanity. Maybe stress from work was finally catching up. Maybe I needed sleep. But the mirror felt different against my fingertips now, warmer than the surrounding wall, with a faint vibration that seemed to pulse in rhythm with my heartbeat. I started documenting everything. Phone recordings of myself speaking while watching my reflection. Voice memos describing the inconsistencies. The audio revealed nothing unusual, but watching the playback made my skin crawl. On camera, my reflection moved perfectly in sync. Yet standing there, I could swear it lagged behind my actual movements by precious milliseconds. The scent began 3 days later. Jasmine, sweet and cloying, drifting through the bathroom despite having no flowers in the house. It was strongest near the mirror, as if the glass itself was breathing the fragrance. I pressed my nose to the surface, inhaling deeply. The scent vanished instantly, replaced by the metallic taste of my own fear. Sleep became elusive. I'd catch myself staring at the darkened bathroom doorway, wondering if my reflection stood there in the blackness, waiting for me to return. During the day, I avoided mirrors entirely. Store windows, car side mirrors, even the polished surface of my coffee pot sent chills down my spine. But avoidance only made the pull stronger. The mirror seemed to call to me, a magnetic force I couldn't resist. I'd find myself standing in the doorway, studying my reflection from a distance. It looked normal from far away, but something in its posture felt wrong. Too rigid, too aware. The night everything changed. I woke to the sound of running water. bathroom faucet was on, though I distinctly remembered turning it off. I stumbled through the darkness, my bare feet cold against the tile floor. The mirror caught the dim light from the street lamp outside, casting an ethereal glow across the bathroom. I reached for the faucet handle, but my reflection reached for something else. Its hand moved toward the right side of the mirror, while mine moved left. I froze, watching as my reflection's fingers pressed against the glass from the other side. The surface rippled like water concentric circles spreading outward from the point of contact. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was impossible. Mirrors don't ripple. Glass doesn't bend. But my reflection was moving independently now, its mouth opening and closing as if speaking words I couldn't hear. Its eyes held a desperate urgency, pleading with me to understand something vital. I stumbled backward, knocking over a bottle of shampoo. It clattered across the tiles, but my reflection didn't startle. It remained perfectly still, watching me with an expression I'd never seen on my own face. Not quite anger, not quite sadness, something deeper, something hungry. The jasmine scent returned, overwhelming now. So strong it made me dizzy. I gripped the doorframe, trying to steady myself, but the reflection moved closer to the glass. Its breath fogged the mirror from the inside, condensation forming patterns that looked almost like letters, almost like words. I couldn't look away. Even as every instinct screamed at me to run, I found myself stepping forward. My reflection stepped back, maintaining perfect distance. But when I reached toward the mirror, it didn't mirror my movement. Instead, it shook its head violently, pressing both palms against the glass. The surface was no longer solid. My fingertips sank into it like thick honey, the glass yielding to my touch. The sensation was neither warm nor cold, but something between, a texture that didn't belong in any world I understood. My reflection's eyes widened in terror, its mouth opening in a silent scream. I tried to pull my hand back, but the mirror held fast. The glass climbed up my wrist, my forearm, pulling me deeper into its silver depths. My reflection was fighting now, pushing against my hand from the other side, trying to keep me out. But the mirror wanted me more than my reflection wanted to protect me. The last thing I remember clearly was the moment my face touched the glass. The jasmine scent exploded around me, so intense it burned my nostrils. The world flipped, rotated, twisted inside out. I was falling upward, or perhaps standing downward, in a space that existed in the gap between truth and lie. When I finally opened my eyes, I was standing in my bathroom again. The mirror looked perfectly normal. My reflection moved when I moved, smiled when I smiled, nodded when I nodded. Everything was exactly as it should be, but something fundamental had changed. The person looking back at me wasn't quite right. The eyes were too knowing. The smile too practiced. And when I whispered a truth aloud, my reflection's lips moved a fraction too late, as if it was learning the words instead of speaking them. I pressed my hand against the glass, and this time my reflection's hand met mine perfectly. But the surface was cold now, dead cold, and somewhere in the space between my palm and the mirror, I could feel another hand pressing back. Warm, desperate, alive. The mirror no longer ripples when I touch it. My reflection moves in perfect synchronization with my body. Everything appears normal to anyone who might look. But I know the truth that no one else can see. I know who's trapped on the other side of the glass, pounding silently against a barrier that no longer yields. And I know that the person wearing my face, living my life, speaking my words, isn't me at all. The mirror got what it wanted. The question that haunts me now, as I watch this stranger wear my skin, is simple. How long has it been waiting for someone foolish enough to reach through the glass? The jasmine scent lingers still, strongest in the moments between sleep and waking, when the boundary between truth and reflection grows thin. And sometimes, in those quiet moments, I swear I can hear my own voice calling from somewhere far away, begging someone to listen, to understand, to help. But mirrors, I've learned, are excellent at keeping secrets. And the person on this side of the glass seems perfectly content to keep mine. Story 3. It's the smallest room in the apartment. I keep nothing inside, just an old chair and peeling wallpaper. But the air inside is always cold, even when the rest of the house is stifling. Not cold like winter, cold like neglect, like someone's been waiting without moving. I measured the temperature. It dips every time I open the door, even if I don't step in. Once, I closed the door and leaned against it. The wood thumped softly from the other side. Just once. Not asking to be let out, just to be known. That was when I started paying attention. chair faces the window, but there's no view, just a brick wall inches away. The previous tenant left it behind, along with the faded floral wallpaper that curls at the edges like dried skin. I told myself I'd redecorate, but something about disturbing that space felt wrong. The chair sits perfectly centered, as if someone had measured the distance from each wall with obsessive precision. I began keeping a journal. Small things at first. The way my breath misted when I stepped inside, even during the hottest days. How the floorboards never creaked in that room, though they groaned throughout the rest of the apartment. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was expectant, like holding your breath underwater. On the third day of documentation, I noticed the wallpaper had changed. Not dramatically. Just one flower in the pattern near the baseboard. It faced the opposite direction from all the others. I stared at it until my eyes watered, convinced I was mistaken. But when I compared it to my photograph from the previous day, there it was, a single bloom that had somehow turned itself around. I started spending longer periods in the room, trying to catch the changes as they happened. The cold seemed to respond to my presence, growing more intense the longer I stayed. My fingers would go numb, and I'd find myself rubbing warmth back into my hands without remembering when I'd lost feeling in them. The whispers started on the 5th day. They came through the radiator first, faint, like distant conversations bleeding through thin walls. But the radiator was old and disconnected, painted over so many times it looked like a metallic tumor growing from the floor. I pressed my ear against the cold metal and heard what sounded like someone trying to speak through water. The words were almost familiar, like a song I'd heard in childhood but couldn't quite remember. I began recording everything. The whispers, the temperature fluctuations, the way shadows seemed to pool in corners that should have been touched by light. My phone's battery drained faster in that room, and the recordings came back distorted, filled with static that formed patterns when I played them back. The patterns looked like writing, but in a language that made my head ache to study. The chair started moving, not while I watched. It was too clever for that. But each morning, it would be facing a slightly different direction, always toward the door, as if whoever sat in it was waiting for something to arrive. I marked its position with tape, but the tape would peel away overnight, leaving residue that felt warm to the touch. The cold was spreading. It leaked under the door now, creeping down the hallway like slow water. I'd find myself pulling on sweaters in the middle of summer, and my breath would mist in the kitchen if I stood too close to that wall. The apartment felt like it was developing hypothermia, growing numb from the inside out. I decided to stay in the room overnight. I brought blankets, a thermos of hot coffee, and my camera. The chair watched me set up my sleeping bag in the corner, its empty seat somehow more present than if someone had been sitting in it. The wallpaper flowers seemed to rustle without any breeze, their faded petals turning toward me like small, desperate faces. The cold hit me in waves. It would surge and retreat like breathing, and I realized I was feeling the rhythm of something alive. Something that had been waiting in that room far longer than I'd been aware of it. The whispers grew clearer as the sun disappeared, and I began to understand fragments of what they were saying. They were calling my name, not the name on my lease or my mail. The name I'd had before I learned to speak, before I understood that I was separate from the world around me. A name that existed in the space between sleeping and waking, between breathing in and breathing out. A name that belonged to the cold. I must have dozed, because I woke to find the chair had moved again. It was facing me now, and the seat was warm. The impression of someone still lingered in the cushion, as if they'd just stood up and walked away. But there was nowhere to go. The room had no other exits, no place for anyone to hide. The wallpaper was moving. The flowers were turning, all of them now, rotating slowly like a field of faces following the sun. But there was no sun in that room, only the cold and the chair and the growing certainty that I was no longer alone. The whispers had become a chorus, and they were all saying the same thing over and over in voices that sounded like my own. We've been waiting for you to come home. I tried to leave, but the door wouldn't budge. The handle turned, but the door remained sealed, as if the frame had grown around it. The windows were just painted glass now, showing nothing but darkness. The room had become smaller, or I had become larger, or space itself had folded in ways that made direction meaningless. The chair was empty, but I could feel someone sitting in it, watching me with eyes that had forgotten how to blink. The cold wasn't coming from the air anymore. It was coming from inside me, spreading through my veins like ice water. I was becoming the cold, becoming the room, becoming the thing that had been waiting. When finally managed to force the door open, the hallway beyond was different. Longer than before, with doors that led to rooms I'd never seen. The apartment was growing, expanding to accommodate whatever had followed me out of that cold space. I could hear it behind me, patient and persistent. The soft sound of someone settling into a chair that had been waiting empty for far too long. I don't go into that room anymore, but it doesn't matter. The room comes to me now, in the spaces between thoughts, in the pause between heartbeats. The cold follows me wherever I go, and sometimes, when I'm not paying attention, I find myself sitting in that chair, facing a door that opens onto nothing, waiting for the next person to notice that one room in their home that shouldn't be cold. The wallpaper flowers are still turning, still following something that only they can see. And in the quiet moments, when the world holds its breath, I can hear them whispering my name. The name I had before I learned to be afraid of rooms that shouldn't exist, but do. Story 4. Every corner of my home holds more shadow than it should. I bought brighter bulbs. Nothing changed. The darkness there doesn't obey light, it absorbs it. And the longer I look, the deeper it seems, like a space waiting to expand. I once dropped a pen and watched it roll into a corner. It never came out. I reached in. The air felt thick, like pushing through syrup. I pulled back quickly, but the cold lingered on my skin. Now I leave the corners alone, but sometimes I catch myself glancing back and feel something glance back slower. The living room corner behind my couch became the first one I truly noticed. During an ordinary evening, I sat reading when my peripheral vision caught movement. Just a shift in the shadows, like fabric settling. When I turned, the corner seemed deeper than before, stretching back further than the wall should allow. I stood and approached, running my hand along the wall. The surface felt normal, solid plaster painted white. But the shadow remained, unaffected by the overhead light directly above it. I convinced myself it was an optical illusion. Old houses play tricks. The floorboards creak, the walls settle, shadows dance. But the next day, I found myself staring at that corner again. The darkness had texture now, almost velvet-like in its density. I could feel it pulling at my attention, drawing my gaze back whenever I tried to focus on my book or television. I began documenting what I saw. A small notebook became my companion, filled with sketches of the corners and descriptions of their changing depths. The bathroom corner grew darker after I showered, steam seeming to feed whatever lived in the shadows. kitchen corner whispered with the sound of settling wood, but only when I stood directly in front of it. Each room revealed its own anomaly, its own version of impossible darkness. The bedroom corner disturbed me most. I woke one night to find my sheets damp with sweat, not from heat, but from a cold that seemed to seep from the walls themselves. The corner had expanded, I was certain. It reached further into the room, creating a space that shouldn't exist. I measured the walls the next morning, marking distances with pencil lines. The measurements were correct, but the corner still looked wrong. I started leaving lights on throughout the house. Every lamp, every overhead fixture, every LED strip I could install. The electric bill tripled, but the corners remained untouched by illumination. They absorbed light like black holes, growing more defined against the brightness surrounding them. The contrast made them seem even more present, more aware. Sleep became difficult. I would lie in bed, eyes drawn to the bedroom corner, watching its edges shift and breathe. Sometimes I caught glimpses of movement within the darkness, like shapes forming and dissolving. I began sleeping with my back to the corner, but I could feel it behind me, patient and expanding. The breaking point came during a storm. Power flickered throughout the house, and in those moments of darkness, I heard them. All the corners were whispering, their voices overlapping in a language I couldn't understand, but somehow recognized. The sound came from everywhere and nowhere, filling the spaces between my thoughts. When the lights returned, the whispers stopped, but the corners had changed again. They were larger now, more aggressive in their presence. The living room corner had claimed space behind the couch, forcing me to push furniture closer to the center of the room. The kitchen corner made preparing meals uncomfortable, its darkness seeming to reach toward me when I turned my back. I found myself walking through my own home like a visitor, avoiding walls and staying in the center of each room. I tried to escape one evening, packing a bag and heading for the front door. But as I reached for the handle, I noticed something that made my blood freeze. The corner where the door met the wall was darker than the others. It pulsed with the same impossible depth, and as I watched, it began to expand. The door itself seemed to sink back into the shadow, becoming part of the darkness. I ran to the back door, then to the windows, but each exit was being consumed by the same phenomenon. The corners were claiming the spaces between spaces, the gaps where walls met. where reality folded in on itself. I was being sealed inside my own home by shadows that existed in dimensions I couldn't comprehend. That night, I sat in the center of my living room, surrounded by the expanding darkness. The corners had grown bold, reaching toward each other across the ceiling and floor. They were creating a web of shadow that would eventually meet, covering everything in their impossible depths. I wrote in my notebook until the darkness reached my hands, until the pen became too cold to hold. Now I sit in the center of what used to be my home, in the last circle of light that the corners haven't claimed. They're patient, these shadows. They don't rush. They simply exist, growing deeper and wider, waiting for the moment when they finally touch and complete their work. I can hear them breathing now, a sound like wind through empty spaces that shouldn't exist. The corners are watching me write these words, and I can feel their anticipation. They know something I don't, something about the nature of space and shadow, and the places where light fears to go. My pen is growing cold again, and the notebook pages are becoming harder to see. Soon, I'll put down these words and close my eyes, and when I open them again, I'll finally understand what the corners have been trying to show me. The darkness is almost complete now, and I'm beginning to realize that I was never the one living in this house. I was just the light that helped the corners grow stronger, the witness they needed to become real. They've been feeding on my attention, my fear, my desperate need to understand. And now that they're strong enough, they don't need me anymore. The corners are too dark because they were never meant to hold light. They were meant to hold something else. Something that's been waiting in the spaces between walls, in the gaps where reality bends. And now, finally, it's ready to emerge. Story 5. The floors creak. That's normal. But lately, they don't match my movements. I take a step, and sometimes I hear 2 creaks. One follows. Once, I paused mid-step just to test. The sound came anyway. A delayed echo, imperfect, like a mimic trying to match a beat it never learned. I recorded my steps down the hallway. On playback, there were extra footfalls, some heavier, some softer, some faster than I'd ever move. I've started walking barefoot, quietly, as if to avoid being noticed by whatever's been learning to walk behind me. The recording equipment sits on my desk now, its red light blinking steadily. I've been documenting everything. The microphone catches sounds I swear I don't make, shuffling when I'm still, breathing that doesn't match my rhythm. The digital display shows audio levels spiking during my silence. I play back the files, adjusting volume levels, isolating frequencies. There's something there. Something that moves when I move, breathes when I breathe, but always just slightly off tempo. My apartment feels different. The walls seem to absorb sound differently during certain hours. I press my palm against the plaster and feel a subtle vibration, like a heartbeat beneath the surface. The temperature changes without warning. The thermostat reads normal, but my breath fogs in the bathroom mirror while sweat beads on my forehead. The contradiction makes no sense. I document the temperature readings, taking measurements throughout each room. The numbers don't lie, but my skin tells a different story. I've started leaving objects in specific positions. A pen angled precisely on the coffee table. A book opened to a marked page. A glass of water filled to an exact level. Each morning I check. The pen has moved. The book's pages have been turned. The water level has dropped, but the glass remains untouched by my lips. I photograph everything now. The images show the changes, but they also show something else. Shadows that don't match the light sources. Reflections that lag behind their objects. The mirror in the hallway caught my attention first. I walk past it dozens of times daily, but recently my reflection seems to hesitate. Not by much, just a fraction of a second, as if it's watching me leave before deciding to follow. I've tested this, walking back and forth, studying the timing. The delay is consistent, measurable. My reflection moves just after I do, like it's copying rather than mirroring. Sleep has become difficult. I lie in bed, listening to the sounds of settling wood and shifting foundation. But between the familiar noises, there are others. Footsteps in the hallway, slow, deliberate. They stop outside my door. I hold my breath and wait. The handle never turns. The footsteps never retreat. They simply fade, as if whoever was there gradually became less solid, less present, but not less real. I've started keeping a journal. Writing helps me process what I'm experiencing. The pages fill with observations, measurements, theories. But when I reread my entries, I find words I don't remember writing. Sentences that complete my thoughts in ways I wouldn't. The handwriting looks like mine, but the pressure is different, heavier, more deliberate, as if someone else held my pen and tried to match my script. The phone rings sometimes. When I answer, there's only static. But within that static, I hear whispers, fragments of words, my name spoken in my own voice. I've recorded these calls, audio files show the same patterns. Static, then whispers, then my voice speaking words I never said. The conversations seem to be responses to questions I haven't asked, answers to thoughts I haven't voiced. I decided to leave for a few days. Maybe distance would help. Maybe the problem was environmental. I packed a bag and headed toward the door. But as I reached for the handle, I heard it. My own voice from somewhere behind me saying goodbye. I turned around. The apartment was empty, but the voice had been clear, distinct. It sounded like me saying goodbye to myself. Instead of leaving, I went to the window. The street below looked normal. People walking dogs, cars passing, life continuing as it always had. But my reflection in the window glass was doing something different. It was packing a bag, moving with purpose, getting ready to leave while I stood still, watching. The reflection finished packing and walked toward the door. I watched myself leave while I remained. The footsteps returned that night. But this time, they were in perfect sync with mine. I walked to the kitchen. The sounds matched exactly. I stopped. They stopped. I walked backward. They followed. But when I looked down, I saw 2 sets of footprints in the thin layer of dust on the floor. Mine and others. The same size. The same pattern. But pressed deeper, as if made by someone heavier. I've stopped trying to rationalize what's happening. The recordings, the photographs, the measurements, they all confirm what I'm experiencing. But they also show something else. In every image, every audio file, every documented moment, there are 2 of everything. 2 voices, 2 reflections, 2 sets of footsteps. One is mine. The other is learning to be me. The journal entries have changed. Now they're written in first person, but they describe my actions from an outside perspective. They talk about watching me sleep, about learning my habits, about practicing my walk, my voice, my way of breathing. The handwriting has become more confident, less like an imitation and more like an original. I realize now that I'm not being haunted. I'm being replaced. Slowly, carefully. Whatever this is, it's not trying to scare me away. It's trying to become me. And with each passing day, it's getting better at it. The footsteps sound almost right now. Almost perfect. Soon, I think, no one will be able to tell the difference. The mirror shows only one reflection now. But I can't be sure which one of us it's showing. Story 6. When the house is quiet, I hear things I shouldn't. scrapes too long to be natural, whispers with no mouth, but it's only in the absolute silence. I tried masking it with music, white noise, anything, but silence always returns. It waits until I forget. Then it hums, low, irregular. I don't recognize the sound, but my body does. It tightens. It listens. One night, I covered my ears with pillows. It didn't help. The silence crawled through the walls, folding into the room like static in reverse. And it knew I was pretending not to listen. The first recording was accidental. I'd left my phone on the kitchen counter, voice memo still running from earlier when I'd been dictating grocery lists. Later, scrolling through, I found 47 minutes of what should have been nothing. But at the 23-minute mark, there it was. A rhythm, soft percussion, like fingertips on wood. Patient, deliberate. I played it back through headphones, volume pushed to maximum. The tapping wasn't random. It followed a pattern, repeating every 11 beats before shifting slightly. As if learning, I started recording everything. The bedroom at night, the hallway during afternoon stillness, the basement when the furnace cycled off. Each file revealed something new. In the bedroom recording, breathing that wasn't mine, too shallow, too controlled. In the hallway, footsteps that stopped precisely when I held my breath. The basement audio was worse. Underneath the mechanical hum, voices layered like sediment, speaking in languages I couldn't identify, but somehow understood. They were discussing me. The house began responding to my documentation. Doors that I'd never noticed creaking suddenly announced every opening with theatrical groans. The refrigerator, silent for years, developed a wheeze that sounded almost conversational. Light switches clicked with new weight, as if something was pressing back. I measured the temperature in each room obsessively, noting how the air grew colder in spaces where I'd placed recording devices, as if whatever lived in the silence resented being captured. My reflections started arriving late. Not dramatically, just a half-second delay that made mirrors feel like windows into somewhere else. I'd move my hand, and my reflection would follow, slightly out of sync, like a bad video call. In the bathroom mirror, I caught it turning its head before I did, looking toward the doorway with an expression I hadn't made. When I spun around, nothing was there, but in the recording from that room, taken the night before, I could hear my own voice whispering words I'd never spoken. The recordings revealed a truth I'd been avoiding. The sounds weren't coming from the house. They were coming from me. my own voice, distorted and layered, speaking during moments when I remembered being silent. In one file, I heard myself having conversations with something that answered in my own voice, shifted slightly higher, as if speaking from a different angle of my throat. The breathing sounds were mine, but recorded when I was holding my breath. The footsteps matched my gait exactly, but played while I sat motionless. I began testing this discovery. I would sit in perfect stillness, holding my breath and record. The files consistently captured me moving, breathing, speaking, but not to empty rooms. Something was responding, using my voice, my movements, my presence. I was performing for an audience that lived inside my own existence, watching from the gaps between my thoughts. The silence wasn't empty. It was full of me, multiplied and twisted, living in the spaces where I wasn't paying attention. The breaking point came when I tried to stop recording. I deleted every file, threw away the recording devices, even broke my phone. But the silence had learned enough. It didn't need the equipment anymore. It had memorized my patterns, my voices, my breathing. Now it could continue without me. I began hearing the recordings playing from rooms I wasn't in, my own voice echoing through the house, having conversations with invisible others, discussing plans I couldn't remember making. The house fills with my own sounds now, reflected and multiplied. I move through rooms where my voice whispers from the walls, where my footsteps follow me like shadows. The silence has become a museum of every sound I've ever made, playing them back in endless combinations. I am the haunting. I am the presence that disturbs the peace. The silence was never empty. It was just waiting for me to fill it with enough of myself that it could continue without me. When I leave the house now, I can still hear it through the walls. My voice calling my name from inside, growing more confident with each repetition. The silence has learned to speak with my mouth, to move with my body, to exist with my presence. It doesn't need me anymore. It has become me more perfectly than I ever was. And late at night, when the house is finally quiet, I can hear it laughing with my voice, practicing being human, preparing for the day when it no longer needs the original to reference. The recordings continue, though I've stopped making them. Somewhere in the house, my voice documents everything, speaking to the silence, teaching it to be more than the absence of sound. It's learning to be the presence that lives in the gaps, the voice that speaks when no one is listening, the existence that continues when the original finally stops. And in the perfect quiet, I can hear it humming, low and irregular, with a rhythm that matches my heartbeat exactly. Story 7. It's a simple window, old, stiff, secure, but it slides open farther than it physically should, past the stopper, past the track. Once I pulled it fully closed and locked it. The next morning the gap had returned. I tried sealing it shut. The seal was shredded, not torn, unwound. There's no breeze, no evidence of tampering. And yet, the air inside smells faintly of soil. Wet soil, like something has been climbing in and out quietly, and leaving the opening just wide enough for me to wonder why. The smell hit me first that morning. Rich, earthy, like freshly turned dirt after rain. I stood in my kitchen, coffee mug halfway to my lips, trying to place it. The scent didn't belong here, not on the third floor of a building surrounded by concrete and steel. I followed it to the living room window, the one that faces the narrow alley between buildings. The familiar gap greeted me, 2 inches of open space that shouldn't exist. I ran my fingers along the frame, feeling for damage or warping. The wood was solid, unmarked. The track showed no signs of being forced. Yet there it was, that impossible opening that defied the window's mechanical limits. I pressed my palm against the glass, sliding it firmly closed until it clicked against the stopper. The lock turned with a satisfying snap. Problem solved, but the soil smell lingered. That afternoon, I found myself checking the window repeatedly. Each time, it remained closed, locked, secure. I even placed a small piece of tape across the seam where the glass met the frame. A simple test. If something moved it, I'd know. The tape held through dinner, through my evening routine, through the last check before bed. I woke to that earthy scent again, stronger now. The tape lay on the windowsill, not torn, but carefully removed, curled in a perfect spiral. The window gaped open exactly as before, 2 inches, no more, no less. I stared at the spiral of tape, trying to understand how adhesive could be removed so precisely without heat or solvent. My hands shook slightly as I examined the window frame again. This time, I noticed something I'd missed before. The wood around the track was slightly damp. Not from rain, the weather had been dry for days. I touched the moisture, bringing my fingers to my nose. Soil. Wet soil. I started keeping a notebook, documenting each incident. The window opened overnight, always to the same degree. The lock showed no signs of being forced. The mysterious dampness appeared and disappeared without pattern. Most disturbing was the way the air seemed to move through that gap, not in or out, but somehow sideways, carrying scents that belonged underground. On the fourth night, I decided to stay awake. I positioned myself in the armchair across from the window, notebook ready, determined to catch whatever was happening. The apartment fell silent, except for the distant hum of the building's ventilation system. I watched the sealed window, waiting. Around what felt like midnight, the smell intensified. Not just soil now, but something else. Something organic and complex, like decomposing leaves mixed with minerals. The air in the room grew thick, almost syrupy. I could taste it on my tongue, metallic and dark. The window didn't move. I watched it intently, never blinking for more than a second. Yet, gradually, imperceptibly, the gap began to appear. Not sliding open, emerging. As if the space between the glass and frame was expanding on its own, creating room where none should exist. I stood up, my notebook falling to the floor. The sound echoed strangely in the thick air. As I approached the window, I noticed something else had changed. The view through the glass was wrong. The brick wall of the neighboring building seemed farther away, as if the alley had widened. But that was impossible. I'd looked out this window thousands of times. I pressed my face close to the gap, trying to see outside. The air flowing through felt different against my skin, cooler, damper, carrying scents that spoke of deep places and old things. I could hear something too, barely audible beneath the building's mechanical sounds. A soft scratching, like fingernails on stone. My breath fogged the glass as I peered through the impossible opening. The alley below looked deeper than it should, filled with shadows that seemed to move independently of any light source. And there, pressed against the brick wall across the way, was a handprint. Dark and wet, too large to be human. I stumbled backward, my heart racing. When I looked again, the handprint was gone. But the scratching sound continued, growing louder. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, from the walls, from the floor, from the air itself. I grabbed the window and tried to force it shut. The glass wouldn't budge. The gap remained exactly as it was, as if the space itself had become solid. My hands slipped on the suddenly damp frame, and I realized the moisture was spreading. The walls around the window were beginning to weep, dark stains appearing in the wallpaper. The scratching stopped abruptly. In the silence that followed, I heard something else, a sound like soil being turned, like something large moving through earth. It came from below, from above, from within the walls themselves. I ran to the kitchen, searching for something to seal the window permanently. Tape, plastic, anything. But when I returned, the gap had changed. Not larger or smaller, but different somehow. The air flowing through it carried new scents, mildew, old paper, and something that reminded me of childhood fears. I pressed my ear to the gap, trying to locate the source of the sounds. What I heard made my blood freeze. Breathing. Slow, steady breathing that didn't match the rhythm of wind or building systems. It was patient, measured, like something waiting just out of sight. I spent the rest of the night huddled in the far corner of the room, watching the window. The gap remained constant. That impossible 2-inch opening that defied physics and reason. As dawn approached, the breathing gradually faded, replaced by the normal sounds of morning traffic and birds. But the soil smell remained. I called in sick to work and spent the day researching. I measured the window frame from every angle, photographed the gap with rulers for scale, even brought in a level to check if the building had shifted. Everything appeared normal except for the space that shouldn't exist. That evening, I tried a different approach. I placed a small recording device near the window, hoping to capture evidence of the breathing. I set up a motion sensor, positioned a camera, even sprinkled flour on the windowsill to catch any disturbance. I woke to find the flour scattered in patterns that looked almost like footprints, but too large and strangely shaped. The motion sensor had triggered once. At exactly the same moment, my recording device stopped working. The camera showed nothing but static during the crucial hours. The gap remained, unchanged and unchanging. Now I sit here each night, watching that impossible opening. The soil smell has become part of my apartment's atmosphere. Sometimes I catch glimpses of movement through the gap, shadows that don't belong to the alley outside. Sometimes I hear the breathing return, patient and waiting. I've stopped trying to close the window. The gap exists now, as much a part of this space as the walls or floor. It's teaching me something about the nature of boundaries, about the spaces between things that we pretend don't exist. The handprint appeared again last night, closer this time. When I looked carefully, I could see the impression of fingertips pressed against the glass from the inside. My side of the window. I haven't looked at my hands yet. I'm afraid of what I might find under my fingernails. The soil smell is stronger now, and I'm beginning to understand that the window isn't opening wider. The room is getting smaller. Story 8. I noticed it by accident. Holding my breath while brushing my teeth, the water started pooling. But the moment I exhaled, it gurgled down like normal. I tested it again. Inhale, silence. Exhale, drain. I don't understand how or why. But now I feel like it's connected. The deeper I breathe, the more aggressive the drain becomes. Once, I hyperventilated from panic. The sink screamed, high-pitched, like pressure escaping a sealed throat. I've tried avoiding it, but even the bathroom mirror now fogs up when I'm not inside. As if something in there is still exhaling without lungs. The first morning I became aware of this connection, I stood frozen in my bathroom, toothbrush dripping foam onto the tile floor. The water in the basin had turned perfectly still, creating a mirror-like surface that reflected my confused expression. I leaned closer, watching my breath create small ripples across the trapped water. Then I held my breath completely. The silence was immediate and absolute. Not even the faint whisper of air through the pipes remained. I began documenting everything in a small notebook I kept beside my bed. Every breath, every drain response, every subtle change in the water's behavior. The patterns became clearer each day. Shallow breathing produced gentle, almost musical gurgles. Deep, deliberate breaths triggered violent suction sounds that seemed to echo from somewhere much deeper than the pipes should allow. The water temperature began responding too. Cold breaths created warm water pooling. Warm exhales turned the basin ice cold against my palms. My morning routine became an experiment. I would approach the sink with measured steps, place my hands on the porcelain rim, and feel for vibrations. The basin pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat heard through a stethoscope. When I breathed normally, the pulse matched my rhythm exactly. When I held my breath, the pulsing stopped completely, as if the entire plumbing system had fallen into suspended animation. The mirror began fogging differently. Instead of the usual even condensation after hot showers, it created precise patterns. Handprints appeared where no hands had touched. Streaks formed words I couldn't quite read, always dissolving before I could focus on them completely. The fog appeared even when I wasn't in the bathroom, spreading across the glass in deliberate, rhythmic waves that matched breathing patterns. I started recording the sounds with my phone. Playing them back revealed layers I hadn't noticed. Beneath the gurgling, there were whispers. Not words exactly, but vocal patterns that sounded almost conversational. The pitch shifted based on my breathing depth. Shallow breaths produced higher frequencies. Deep breaths created lower, more resonant tones. The recordings showed sound waves that looked disturbingly organic, like vocal cords captured in digital form. One evening, I decided to test the limits. I sat on the bathroom floor, back against the closed door, and began breathing exercises. Slow, controlled inhales followed by extended exhales. The drain responded immediately, creating a rhythm that felt almost musical. The water danced in the basin, forming small whirlpools that spun in perfect synchronization with my breath cycles. Then I tried holding my breath for longer periods. The silence stretched beyond comfort, beyond the normal range of human lung capacity. The water remained perfectly still, but the mirror began showing something else. My reflection breathed normally while I held my breath. The image in the glass moved independently, chest rising and falling in steady rhythm, while my real body remained motionless. I jumped up, gasping, and the drain exploded with sound. Water rushed down so violently that suction pulled at my clothes, my hair, creating a miniature tornado effect around the basin. The mirror reflection returned to normal, but now it lagged slightly behind my movements, like a delayed video feed. The temperature of the bathroom began fluctuating wildly. Hot spots appeared on the floor tiles where cold ones should be. The faucet handles became warm to the touch, even when no hot water flowed. The porcelain sink developed a fever radiating heat that made the air shimmer slightly around the edges. I began avoiding the bathroom entirely, using the kitchen sink for everything. But the connection followed me. The kitchen drain started responding to my breathing patterns too. Then the shower drain. Every water outlet in my home synchronized with my respiratory rhythm. I could feel the entire plumbing system pulsing with my heartbeat, breathing with my lungs. The sounds grew more complex. What started as simple gurgles evolved into harmonies. Multiple tones layered together, creating chord progressions that shifted with with my emotional state. Anxiety produced dissonant, grinding notes. Calm breathing generated almost pleasant melodies. Fear created sharp, staccato bursts that hurt my ears. I tried leaving the house. The public restroom at the coffee shop responded immediately. The sink drain matched my breathing before I even approached it. The mirror fogged in familiar patterns. Other people seemed oblivious, washing their hands normally while the basin danced to my hidden rhythm. Back home, I attempted to break the connection. I covered the drain with a rubber stopper, sealing it completely. The pressure built underneath, creating a muffled drum beat that grew louder with each breath. The stopper vibrated, then began lifting slightly with each exhale, as if something underneath was trying to escape. When I removed the stopper, the release was explosive. Water shot upward like a geyser, soaking the ceiling and walls. The sound was deafening, a screaming rush that made my ears ring. But within the chaos, I heard something else. A voice, clear and distinct, calling my name from inside the drain. I knelt beside the sink, ear pressed against the rim, listening. The voice repeated, muffled but unmistakable. It matched my breathing perfectly, saying my name on every exhale, remaining silent during inhales. The tone was my own voice, but speaking from somewhere impossibly deep within the pipes. Now I understand that separation is impossible. The connection has become permanent, extending beyond just the drains. Every breath creates ripples in standing water throughout the house. Glasses on tables pulse with my heartbeat. The toilet bowl reflects my breathing patterns. Even rain puddles outside respond to my presence, their surfaces moving in synchronization with my chest. I wake each morning to the sound of water moving through walls, following rhythms I haven't consciously created. The mirror stays fogged now, displaying messages I can almost read. The sink breathes when I'm not there, exhaling humid air that carries the scent of places I've never been. The voice in the drain has grown stronger, more insistent. It speaks in my sleep, calling through the pipes, creating conversations I can't quite remember upon waking. Sometimes I find myself standing in the bathroom, having discussions with the mirror's reflection, while water flows in impossible directions. I've stopped trying to understand or escape. The connection feels necessary now, like breathing itself. The house breathes with me, through me, around me. We've become a single organism, sharing the same respiratory system. The drains are my lungs, the pipes my circulatory system, the mirrors my eyes reflecting inward. But I wonder, in the quiet moments between breaths, what happens when I stop breathing entirely? Will the house hold its breath too? Will the water stop moving forever? Or will it continue breathing without me, using the voice in the drain to call someone else's name? The mirror fogs with my uncertainty, creating new patterns I'm afraid to read. Story 9. I haven't grown. Nothing about my body has changed, but the door frame brushes my shoulder now when I pass through. I used to fit cleanly. Now it catches my sleeve, grazes my hair. I measured it. It's shrinking inward, not the door, just the frame. Subtle but definite. I tried sanding the edges. The next morning, the frame was narrower than before. It curves slightly now, like it's adapting. I leaned against it once and felt a pulse, slow, deliberate, like a throat preparing to swallow. I don't use that door anymore. But sometimes it opens on its own. The first measurement was simple curiosity. A tape measure across the width, numbers scribbled on paper. 32 inches. Standard. I checked again the next day after sanding. 31 3/4. The wood shavings were gone, swept clean by morning. But the frame had contracted further, as if the sanding had encouraged something deeper to emerge. I began photographing it. Same angle, same lighting, same reference points. The pictures revealed what my eyes wanted to dismiss. The frame was definitely narrowing, but not uniformly. The left side pressed inward more aggressively than the right. The top remained stable, while the bottom curved subtly, creating an asymmetrical throat that seemed to breathe. The texture of the wood changed too. What had been smooth, painted pine now felt organic under my fingertips. Slightly warm, with a grain that seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at it. I ran my palm along the surface and swore I felt something respond, a gentle give, like pressing against living tissue. I started keeping a journal. Measurements, observations, attempts to rationalize what couldn't be rationalized. The entries became increasingly frantic as the weeks passed. The frame was adapting to me, learning my shape, my movements. When I approached from the left, it would adjust. When I carried something bulky, it would accommodate just enough to create the illusion of normalcy before contracting again. The sound started as a whisper. Not voices, but something softer, like fabric brushing against fabric, or breath moving through a narrow space. I pressed my ear against the frame and heard it clearly, a rhythmic compression and expansion, as if the wood itself was breathing. The pulse I'd felt earlier wasn't imagined. It was synchronized with something deeper, something that lived in the space between the frame and the wall. I tried filling the gap with caulk, thinking maybe the sound was air moving through cracks. But the caulk disappeared overnight, absorbed into the wood like water into a sponge. The breathing grew louder, more insistent. Sometimes I could hear it from other rooms, a soft inhalation that seemed to call me closer. The doorframe began to affect other things. Light bulbs in the hallway dimmed when I approached, not flickering, but slowly fading, as if something was drawing power from them. The air near the frame felt thicker, more resistant. Walking through, it became like pushing through invisible curtains that clung to my clothes and skin. I started avoiding the door entirely, using the back entrance instead. But the frame's influence spread. Other doorways in the house began to feel wrong, too narrow, too close, like they were studying me. The bathroom door caught my shoulder. The bedroom door grazed my hip. I measured them all. Every single one had contracted by fractions of inches, all following the same pattern of asymmetrical narrowing. The photographs I'd taken began to change. Not the ones I'd already printed, but the digital files themselves. The frame appeared different in each image, as if it was continuing to evolve, even in the captured moments. I watched one photo slowly transform over the course of hours, the wood grain shifting like water, the opening becoming more organic, less architectural. I tried to research similar phenomena, but every search led to dead ends. No one had documented anything like this. No one had experienced wood that breathed and adapted and learned. I felt completely alone with something that shouldn't exist, couldn't exist, but was undeniably real. The breaking point came when I found myself standing in front of the door at midnight, drawn by the soft breathing sound that had become constant. The frame looked different in the darkness, more curved, more alive. The opening had become perfectly fitted to my body, as if it had been measuring me all along, learning my exact dimensions. I stepped toward it, and the breathing stopped. Complete silence. The frame waited, patient and expectant. I reached out to touch it, and the wood was warm, almost hot. The pulse was stronger now, rapid and excited. I could feel it in my fingertips, in my bones, in the rhythm of my own heart. I tried to pull my hand away, but the wood held it gently, firmly. Not painful, but insistent. The frame began to expand slightly, just enough to accommodate my body if I stepped through. The breathing resumed, deeper now, more urgent. I could smell something sweet and organic, like flowers beginning to decay. With tremendous effort, I yanked my hand free and stumbled backward. The frame contracted immediately, closing to its narrowest point yet. The breathing became a frustrated wheeze, then silence. I ran to the back door and spent the rest of the night in my car, engine running, ready to leave if necessary. When I returned at dawn, the front door was open. Not just unlocked, completely open, hanging wide, as if the frame had given up trying to contain what was inside. The opening was perfectly round now, no longer rectangular. The wood had grown smooth and polished, like the inside of a shell. I packed what I could carry and left that day. But I can't stop thinking about that frame, about the way it learned my shape and tried to accommodate me. Sometimes, in new doorways, I feel that familiar brush against my shoulder. Sometimes, the wood feels warm under my palm. And sometimes, in the quiet moments before sleep, I hear that soft breathing sound, patient and persistent, as if something is still waiting for me to step through. I haven't grown. Nothing about my body has changed. But every door frame feels wrong now, too narrow or too wide, never quite right. And I can't shake the feeling that somewhere, in a house I'll never return to, there's a perfectly fitted opening that remembers exactly how I feel. Story 10. The grandfather clock in my study chimed softly as midnight arrived, its deep resonance filling the room like a lullaby. I settled into my old leather armchair, a cherished book resting in my hands, while the rain whispered gently against the window panes. The house murmured around me, its ancient timbers sighing into the night's embrace. My gaze drifted to the hallway door, bathed in the warm